I once met a man in Yokohama who spoke about his workplace with a level of reverence, the kind usually reserved for family or faith. He told me, with this quiet sort of pride, that his grandfather had worked there and his father after him. To him, the name on his paycheck wasn't just a brand. It was, and this is the key, a literal translation of national identity.
Right.
In Japanese, Nissan effectively means made in Japan.
It's right there in the name.
Exactly. For decades, that name carried the weight of a country's post-war resurrection. It was fueled by the smell of burnt rubber and the roar of engines that had, famously humbled Porsche and Alfa Romeo on the world's greatest racetracks.
The glory days, the GTR legend.
Absolutely. But then he showed me something that felt like a betrayal of that heritage. He pointed toward a row of cars from the mid-90s, boxy, uninspired sedans that looked less like national pride and more like, beige appliances on wheels.
Yeah, the Altima of that era. The Sentra. Forgettable.
He described an era where the company's designers seemed to have just stopped trying to turn heads. It was replaced by this cold, clinical obsession with engineering for engineering's sake.
Engineer self-satisfaction.
A period where they offered a dozen different steering wheel options, but completely forgot to give the car a soul.
And what's fascinating is the disconnect, right?
The sheer scale. While the employees were clinging to this prestige of the past, the reality was a financial car crash. In a desperate bid to please everyone, Nissan had created a supply chain so bloated. Get this, they were losing $1,000 on every single car they sold in the United States.
Losing money on every sale, that's a death spiral.
A total death spiral. By 1993, a company that hadn't seen red ink in half a century suddenly posted a staggering $1 billion loss. It just got worse. That figure would soon double, then triple, until it reached a catastrophic $6 billion. The Made in Japan icon wasn't just stalling, it was heading for a total structural collapse. So it makes you wonder, how does a global powerhouse, backed by generations of loyal families and racing legends, lose its confidence so completely that it nearly vanishes?
And more importantly, what kind of person does it take to walk into that wreckage and tell a proud nation that their way of doing things is exactly why they are failing?
Because today we aren't just talking about cars. We're looking at a corporate thriller that spans really 3 decades. So we have a mission in this deep dive. We're going to dissect the structural and cultural forces that drove Nissan to the brink of bankruptcy in the late 90s, the radical intervention that saved it, and, the lingering ghosts that seem to be haunting it right now.
We're looking at, I think, 3 massive themes colliding here.
Okay.
First, what I'd call the success trap. How the very systems that made Japan a superpower in the 80s became toxic in the 90s.
Right. Success breeding failure.
Exactly. Second is the outsider paradox. What happens when a culture that prizes harmony above all else is forced to import a leader who prizes conflict?
A total culture clash.
And finally, the ghost in the machine, the constant battle between engineering purity and actual product quality. That's a ghost that's still rattling around their factories today.
That first point is where I want to start. The success trap.
The foundation of the problem.
I've been spending a lot of time lately digging through the archives of Japan's lost decade, trying to understand how a titan like Nissan nearly vanished. And as a storyteller, in the digital space, I found that the data tells one story, but the human silence in the boardrooms, that tells another. So imagine, if you will, an office in Atsugi around 1994. I heard about this senior designer, a guy named Kenji, who had spent 20 years perfecting the curve of a sedan's fender.
A lifer.
A total craftsman. And in the Japanese kiretsu system, Kenji wasn't just an employee, he was a cell in a massive breathing organism. Now, he had a brilliant idea for a rugged, elevated vehicle, what we now call an XUV.
The thing that would have saved them a decade later.
But the consensus-driven bureaucracy of the time, it crushed it. It was crushed before it even reached a single sketchpad.
Wow. What was the mechanism?
Every meeting required a stamp of approval, a Hanko stamp, from a dozen different departments. And by the time a design was safe enough for everyone to agree on, it was bland, uninspired, and years behind the global curve.
Designed by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. I read this and I can almost feel the stifling air of those conference rooms. The very harmony that built Japan's post-war miracle became the cage that prevented it from evolving.
Wow.
It's hard not to feel a sense of mourning for the innovation that just died in a drawer because nobody wanted to be the one to break the silence.
That story about Kenji, I mean, it encapsulates the cage of consensus perfectly. But to really understand why his SUV idea died, we have to move beyond just calling it bureaucracy. We have to look at the engine room of the Japanese economy at the time.
The kiretsu.
The kiretsu.
We hear that word a lot when discussing Japan's bubble era, kiretsu. The dictionary usually calls it a conglomerate or a web of interlocking relationships. But that feels, I don't know, too polite for what was actually happening at Nissan.
Right, it is too polite. Let's strip it down. Imagine a poker table. You have the bank, the steel manufacturer, the electronics company, and the car maker Nissan all sitting together.
Okay.
In a normal Western market, they are distinct players. They're competing. They're negotiating hard deals. But in a kiretsu, they all own chips in each other's piles. It's a system called cross-shareholding.
So everyone owns a piece of everyone else.
At its peak, Nissan held equity stakes in roughly 1,400 different companies.
1,400 companies.
Yeah.
That sounds less like a car manufacturer and more like a chaotic mutual fund.
It was a holding company that happened to make cars. And in about half of those 1,400 companies, Nissan owned more than 20% of the stock.
Wow.
Now, historically, this structure was designed as a defense mechanism, a shield. If everyone owns everyone, hostile takeovers from foreign companies are pretty much impossible.
But shields are heavy. I mean, if you're carrying a shield that big, it has to slow you down.
Exactly. The shield became a prison. This created what we call the loyalty trap.
Okay.
Let's say you are a purchasing manager at Nissan in 1995. You need headlights. There's a supplier in Germany offering better technology for 30% less money. A no-brainer, right?
So.
But you cannot buy from them.
Because you're stuck sitting at that poker table with the guy who sells the expensive, outdated headlights.
You effectively own the guy selling the expensive headlights. If you cut him loose to buy the cheaper German ones, his company's stock price drops. And because you own his stock, your company's assets lose value.
So you are financially incentivized to overpay for mediocrity.
It's a feedback loop of inefficiency.
That's diabolical. Yeah. It's essentially an economic suicide pact. You're keeping a dying supplier alive, not because they help you build better cars, but because they are family.
It is circular logic applied to billions of dollars. And the scale was it was massive. At the height of the crisis, Nissan was juggling about 3,000 different suppliers.
I need a benchmark here. Is 3,000 a lot? I mean, it sounds like a lot.
It's astronomical. For comparison, a company like Ford, which was producing a similar volume of vehicles at the time, was operating with roughly 300 to 400 key suppliers.
So 10 times as many.
10 times the administrative bloat, 10 times the logistics, and 10 times the obligatory family dinners with suppliers who had stopped competing on price or innovation, frankly, a decade prior.
So because these 3,000 suppliers knew Nissan had to buy from them, they just stopped trying.
Why innovate? Why lower your prices? You're safe. And this external stagnation, it infected the internal culture. It's what led to that engineer self-satisfaction you mentioned in the intro.
Right, the infinite options.
Exactly. Because they weren't being challenged by the market or by their suppliers, their internal metrics became completely warped. They started offering those dozens of steering wheels, endless trim variations.
Because nobody walks into a dealership and says, I love the car, but, do you have this steering wheel in a slightly different shade of beige?
But inside Nissan, offering that option was seen as good engineering. It showed complexity and capability.
But it created massive inventory costs.
It added almost zero value to the consumer. The factories became obsessed with process over profit. I read that factory managers could tell you down to the second how long it took to assemble a fender.
But they had absolutely no idea how much it cost to build that fender.
None. The accounting was so convoluted by the kiretsu cross holdings that they were flying blind.
That is such a dangerous disconnect. And the numbers, eventually the numbers caught up with them. By 1998, the situation was just grim.
It was a bloodbath.
Nissan had posted global losses in 6 of the previous 7 years. And I read this statistic that just blew my mind. Only 4 out of their 43 models were actually profitable.
Think about that ratio for a second. You are manufacturing 43 different products, and 39 of them are losing you money every time one rolls off the line.
You are effectively paying the customer to take the car away from you.
It's completely unsustainable.
We aren't talking about a credit card bill here. We are talking about $20 billion, roughly 2 trillion yen at the time. They were spending $1 billion a year just on interest payments.
Just servicing the debt, not investing, not R&D, just keeping the lights on. They were bleeding out.
Which leads us to the inevitable conclusion of the 1990s. They couldn't fix this from the inside. The cage of consensus was too strong. The kiretsu ties were too deep.
To cut the suppliers meant cutting family. And Japanese corporate culture at the time simply did not have the stomach for that kind of brutality.
They needed a partner.
Yeah.
But because of that $20 billion debt mountain and that bloated supplier network, nobody wanted to touch them.
No one.
Yeah, this brings us to what I call the desperate search. It's almost painful to look back at this period. Nissan was essentially shopping itself to the world, hat in hand, and just getting the door slammed in its face repeatedly.
It was a profound humiliation for a company that had once been the absolute pride of Japan Inc.
So Ford took a look. They already had ties with Mazda, so they knew the Japanese market.
They did. They did their due diligence. They opened the books, looked at the balance sheet, and effectively said, no thanks, we're good. They ran away.
And then there was Daimler Chrysler.
Mm-hmm.
That rejection was particularly stinging, wasn't it?
Brutal.
I found the quote from a Daimler insider. He said that bailing out Nissan would be like putting $5 billion into a steel container and throwing it into the ocean.
It shows you how toxic the asset was. It wasn't viewed as a fixer-upper with good bones. It was viewed as a total unrecoverable write-off.
A black hole.
Yeah.
So why Renault? I mean, Renault wasn't exactly a titan at the time either. They weren't a Ford or a Daimler.
No, they absolutely weren't. In many ways, Renault was the underdog. They were smaller than the other giants, and they had their own recent history of being a state-owned, inefficient company.
So they'd been through their own turnaround.
And strategically, it was a marriage of weaknesses hoping to create a strength. Think about the map. Renault had almost no presence in North America or Asia, where Nissan, despite its problems, was huge.
Okay.
Conversely, Renault was strong in Europe and Latin America, where Nissan was weak.
So on paper, the geography looks good. They fill in each other's gap.
But the skepticism in the industry was off the charts. The deal happened in March 1999. Renault bought 36.8% of Nissan for $5.4 billion.
And the reaction was?
The industry reaction was best summed up by another CEO who famously said, "Two mules don't make a racehorse."
Ouch. Everyone was betting against them.
Everyone. The rating agencies downgraded Renault immediately after the announcement. The fear was a massive culture clash. You have French nationalism versus Japanese nationalism. Two very proud, very distinct, very rigid corporate cultures.
People thought the internal friction would just burn the whole thing down.
And honestly, looking at the history of cross-border auto mergers, Daimler and Chrysler being the prime example, that was a safe bet.
It was a very safe bet.
Yeah.
But they didn't account for the human element. They didn't account for the G factor.
The outsider.
The ultimate outsider. I was scrolling through some old Tokyo business forums recently, and I came across a perspective that really puts the Ghosn shock into human terms.
Okay.
Try to imagine being a middle manager at the Murayama plant in 1999. You've been told since birth that your company is your family, and lifetime employment is a sacred vow. It's a contract.
A foundation of the whole system.
Right. Then this man, nicknamed Lacoste Killer, and the Le Mans Killer, Carlos Ghosn, arrives from the West. He doesn't speak the language of tradition. He speaks the language of the balance sheet.
A different universe.
I saw a comment from someone whose father was there at the time, and he described the atmosphere not as a business transition, but as a cultural invasion.
Wow. An invasion.
Ghosn began this ruthless restructuring, closing plants that had stood for decades. For the Japanese worker, this wasn't just a job loss, it was a crisis of identity. To survive, Nissan had to kill its own pride.
The savior had to be the villain.
It's a jarring realization. Sometimes the savior has to be the villain of the old world to build a new one. It's a cold, hard lesson in the price of global survival.
And that perspective is so vital because it explains why the turnaround was so difficult and why it needed someone like him. Carlos Ghosn was the quintessential outsider. Born in Brazil, of Lebanese and French heritage, educated in France, he didn't fit into any single box, which meant he wasn't bound by the unspoken social contracts of the kiretsu.
He had previously turned around Michelin in South America and Renault in France, which is where he earned that nickname, Lacoste Killer. But Japan is a different beast entirely.
And interestingly, all the Japan experts at the time told him to go slow. They said, you can't close plants here, you can't fire people, you will cause a strike, you will cause a social revolt.
And he just ignored them?
Completely ignored them. Instead, he did something that I think is really cool. He went to the gemba.
The actual place where the work is done.
The factory floor, the dealership, the design studio.
Right. He didn't just sit in the boardroom in Tokyo looking at spreadsheets. He visited the plants, he talked to dealers, he went to the design studios, he talked to the people on the line.
And what he found was a company that was totally segmented, utterly broken into silos. The US division didn't talk to headquarters in Japan. The European division did its own thing. Engineering didn't talk to marketing. It was just a collection of fiefdoms.
So in October 1999, he unveils the Nissan Revival Plan, the NRP. And this wasn't just another corporate, we'll try our best speech. This was a blood oath.
The commitments were concrete and terrifying.
The commitments were wild. Return to profit in the fiscal year 2000. Achieve a 4.5% operating margin by 2002. And halve the $20 billion debt by 2002.
And the kicker, the part that made everyone in that room sit up straight.
If they didn't meet those goals, the entire executive committee, including Ghosn himself, would resign.
That level of public accountability was unheard of in the Japanese corporate world at the time. Usually you would bow, you'd apologize, maybe cry a little bit on camera, and then you'd stay in your job.
Ghosn put his head on the chopping block publicly. So I want to drill down on how he actually did this, because the promises are one thing, but the execution is another. Specifically, I'm fascinated by the cross-functional teams, or CFTs. On the surface, this sounds like, corporate buzzword bingo. Let's make a task force.
Right, let's form a committee to study the problem.
Exactly. How is this actually different from the 1,000 other meetings they were already having?
That is the right skepticism to have. In 1999, Nissan was the world champion of meetings. They had meetings to plan meetings. But the CFTs were weaponized in a very specific way. Ghosn realized that the board of directors, the old guard, they had too much to lose. They were the ones who built the kiretsu. Asking them to dismantle it was like asking a master architect to bulldoze his own house.
They were emotionally compromised.
And structurally compromised. They couldn't do it, so Ghosn bypassed them completely.
Who did he turn to?
He handpicked middle managers. These were the mavericks, people in their 30s and 40s who knew the company was rotting from the inside but had never been given the keys. He put an engineer, a sales rep, a finance guy, and a supply chain expert in one room and said, fix the purchasing budget. You have 3 months. And here's the revolutionary part. You have authority over your bosses on this matter.
Wait, he gave them authority over their own bosses. In a hierarchy-based culture like Japan, that must have caused absolute chaos.
It was anarchy, but it was controlled anarchy. It was designed to break the vertical silos. Before this, engineering never spoke to sales. Engineering would design a car with a gold-plated ashtray because it was perfect engineering.
And the sales department would be screaming into the void, nobody wants a $500 ashtray.
Yeah.
But nobody could hear them.
The CFTs forced them to sit in a room together until they agreed. And here is the secret sauce. Ghosn didn't just give them a goal. He gave them a deadline and a guarantee. He told them, if you come up with a solution that saves money and makes sense, I will implement it, no matter whose toes you step on.
So he effectively created a shadow government within the corporation.
A shadow government that very quickly became the actual government. This is a masterclass in change management. If you can't change the top and you can't change the bottom, you radicalize the middle.
And once they were radicalized, they went after the suppliers. He cut purchasing costs by 20%.
Which meant breaking that kiretsu hold we talked about earlier.
He reduced the number of suppliers from 3,000 to roughly 1,500.
Imagine the shockwaves that sent through the Japanese economy. He was telling 1,500 family members that they were no longer welcome at the dinner table. Brutal.
He reduced the workforce by 21,000 people. That's 14% of the total company. He closed 5 plants in Japan, including the famous Murayama plant.
That plant was a landmark. Closing it was a powerful symbol that the old Nissan was dying.
And he sold off the non-core shares in those 1,400 partner companies. He liquefied the kiretsu to pay down the debt.
But, and this is crucial, it wasn't just financial engineering. It was a cultural revolution. He changed the language. Literally. English became the official company language.
Which must have been incredibly difficult for a lot of the staff.
But it leveled the playing field. It meant that a great idea from a French engineer at Renault could be heard just as clearly as one from a 30-year Japanese veteran at Nissan.
It also introduced a new vocabulary. I read that Ghosn actually created a dictionary of key terms.
Words like commitment, target, and transparency.
Because in the old culture, a target might have been a polite suggestion and aspiration. For Ghosn, a target was a law. It was non-negotiable.
Exactly. He introduced a meritocracy. He abolished seniority-based promotion and wages. If you performed, you got paid and promoted. If you didn't, you didn't. Sorry.
And he forced transparency on a system that thrived on opacity. He opened the shareholder meetings to the press for the first time. He believed that confusion is the first sign of trouble.
He aired all the dirty laundry.
So he fixes the balance sheet, he fixes the culture, but he still needs to fix the cars. Because you can have the best balance sheet in the world, but if your product is boring, you're dead in the water.
You're still just a well-managed appliance company.
Exactly. I've been looking at the streetscapes of 1990s Tokyo, trying to understand how a company could miss the SUV revolution so badly.
They were completely blind to it.
Incredible. Imagine a young family in the hyper-urbanized sprawl of Minato. Nissan looked at them and saw a need for a practical, bland, compact sedan. A safe choice for a safe society.
Which was true for that one specific market.
For that one market. They were so focused on the domestic urban grind that they ignored the soul of the global market. I heard a story about a marketing executive who argued that Japanese people don't need big cars for small streets, while the rest of the world was falling in love with the freedom and the image of the SUV.
They chose the sensible path, while the world chose adventure.
About the dangers of looking too closely at your own feet while the horizon is changing. They built cars for a world that's already disappearing, and by the time they looked up, the financial floor had fallen out from under them.
It's a reminder that in the tech and auto world, playing it safe is often the riskiest move you can possibly make.
So Ghosn knew this.
Oh, he knew this was the core of it all. He famously said, there is no problem at a car company that good products can't solve.
So he initiates what they call the design renaissance. And he does something pretty radical. He hires Shiro Nakamura from Isuzu, a competitor.
Which, again, was unheard of. In traditional Japan, you don't poach your competitor's top talent to lead your design department. You grow them in-house over 30 years. But Ghosn needed a disruptor, not a lifer.
And Nakamura's philosophy was so simple. Make a product we can sell without any excuse. No more, it's a good car for the price. Just, it's a good car, period.
And you saw the shift immediately. They moved away from that old mindset of, look at the competition, copy Toyota, to focus on the customer.
The 350Z is the perfect example of that. The Z was a legend, an icon, but they had let it die in the 90s.
That was gone.
Bringing it back wasn't just about selling a sports car. It was about signaling to the world that Nissan had its spirit back, its soul.
It was a symbol, a halo car. But symbols don't always pay the bills. The real moneymaker, the one that proved the strategy, was the Qashqai.
Right, the crossover for Europe.
This was a crossover that acknowledged the global shift away from sedans. It was a massive, massive hit because it gave customers what they didn't even know they wanted yet. It had the practicality of a hatchback with the styling and high driving position of an SUV.
They created a segment.
They did. And then the Nissan Leaf in 2010, they bet on EVs way before it was cool.
A huge gamble at the time.
They were pioneers. And structurally, Ghosn elevated design within the company. I read an interview with Alfonso Albaisa, who's a key figure in Nissan design, and he talked about how the U.S. design studio used to feel like an outpost on Mars.
Isolated and ignored.
Yeah. Under Ghosn, they were given a seat at the main table. Design became a driver of the business, not just a downstream afterthought.
So the plan works. We get this incredible V-shaped recovery. They hit their profit targets a full year early. The $20 billion debt vanishes. Profit margins hit industry highs.
And Carlos Ghosn becomes a literal superhero in Japan.
There was a manga comic book about him. He was a rock star.
It was a fairy tale ending.
Right, because here we are talking about this now, and Nissan is in trouble again. Serious trouble. So what happened? How do you go from superhero to villain in some eyes and drag the company back down with you?
This is the fall after the rise.
So,
when you save a company by cutting costs and boosting volume, that becomes your playbook. It's addictive. The strategy shifted from recovery to conquest. They wanted massive market share at all costs. They launched a plan called Power 88.
Power 88, right. Aiming for 8% global market share and an 8% operating margin.
And to get there, they pushed scale over quality.
Exactly. And when you push for massive volume, quality control is often the first thing to slip. This brings us to the elephant in the room for modern Nissan, the CVT problem, the continuously variable transmission. We need to get under the hood here.
Yeah.
I see the memes, I see the Reddit threads, but for the listener who isn't a mechanic, what actually went wrong? Why is Nissan CVT a punchline on the internet?
Right, let's do a quick engineering 101. A traditional automatic transmission has fixed gears. It's like climbing a flight of stairs. You feel the distinct steps.
Yes.
A CVT doesn't have fixed gears. It has two pulleys connected by a steel belt, and these pulleys can change their size continuously.
Like the chain on a 10-speed bicycle? But the gears can slide to any size instantly.
On paper, it is the holy grail of transmissions. It keeps the engine in its perfect sweet spot for power and fuel economy 100% of the time. That's why Nissan bet the farm on it. They wanted those MPG numbers to meet regulations and attract budget-conscious buyers.
Okay, so on paper, it's a genius idea. Where does reality crash the party?
Heat and torque. Nissan, through their subsidiary Jotco, started putting these transmissions in everything. Not just small, lightweight economy cars like the Versa, but heavy SUVs like the Pathfinder and sedans with powerful V6 engines like the Maxima.
And I'm guessing a steel belt held together by friction doesn't love a V6 engine trying to launch a 2-ton SUV from a stoplight.
It hates it. It absolutely hates it. The metal belt would slip under high torque. To prevent the slipping, the car's computer would clamp the pulleys down harder on the belt, which creates immense friction. And friction creates heat.
So you cook the transmission from the inside out.
You literally cook it. The transmission fluid would overheat and break down. The metal would start to grind, and eventually the internal steel belt would just disintegrate.
So you're driving down the highway, you step on the gas to pass someone, the engine revs up, but nothing happens.
The car doesn't go any faster. It's called the slipping sensation, or the CVT shudder. And because Nissan was chasing volume, they were pushing these units out the factory door faster than they could refine the cooling systems or the software.
It circles back to the kiretsu, doesn't it, in a way? They own Jotco, the transmission maker. If Jotco makes a bad transmission, Nissan can't just switch to a better supplier like ZF or Aisin. They are forced to eat their own bad cooking.
It's history rhyming. They broke the old kiretsu to save the company, but then fell into a new dependency trap with their own key subsidiary.
And this mechanical failure led to a brand failure. We have to talk about the big Ultima Energy meme. It's funny on the internet, but it's actually really damaging for a brand's image.
It's devastating. Because the cars were gaining a reputation for being unreliable, their resale value tanked. And because the resale value tanked, the only people buying them new were those who couldn't get approved for a more reliable Toyota or Honda.
So Nissan started aggressively lending to subprime borrowers to keep that sales volume up.
They did. Nissan became the car you bought because you could get financing, not because you wanted the car. It became the undisputed king of the rental fleet.
And once you're the rental car brand, it is incredibly hard to convince someone to pay $50,000 for your premium SUV or your electric Aria. The prestige just evaporates. Then we have the leadership vacuum, the post-Ghosn era. Ghosn was arrested in 2018 in Tokyo on financial misconduct charges. Now, that is a whole other dramatic saga, him escaping Japan in a musical instrument box. But we need to focus on what his exit did to the company.
His exit left a massive gaping hole. Ghosn was a dictator, arguably a necessary one for a time, but when you remove a dictator without a clear succession plan, you get chaos.
The old factions come back.
Exactly. Reports from inside the company suggest that after he left, the scheming and alliances that characterized the old Nissan of the 90s came roaring back. Politics started dictating power more than performance.
And the numbers reflect that chaos. We're looking at a projected net loss of roughly $5.3 billion. That's 750 billion yen for the fiscal year ending in March 2025.
That is a catastrophic number. It puts them right back in the same ballpark as the crisis of the late 90s.
They're cutting over 9,000 jobs. They're reducing production capacity by 20%. It feels like 1999 all over again.
It does. And the most telling sign for me, the most damning piece of evidence, the failed merger with Honda.
Right. In late 2024, there were serious talks between Nissan and Honda. A strategic partnership, maybe even a full merger, to develop EVs together and compete with China. But then Honda just walked away.
Honda looked at Nissan's books and saw too much risk. It is a haunting echo of Ford walking away in the 90s. Honda, their rival, essentially said, "We can't fix this."
So Nissan is once again facing a profound identity crisis. Are they the EV pioneer who made the Leaf? Are they the performance legend that made the GTR? Or are they just the maker of budget rental cars with bad transmissions?
Question. The EV pioneer advantage they had with the Leaf has largely been eroded by Tesla and, more recently, by Chinese competitors like BYD. The performance image is fading as the GTR gets older and older without a true replacement. They're currently stuck in the middle.
Which is the most dangerous place to be in the auto industry.
First.
We started with a man in Yokohama, proud of his grandfather's company. We walked through the valley of the shadow of debt in the 90s, where loyalty killed profit. We saw a foreigner come in, tear down the walls of tradition to save the structure, and we watched the company rise like a phoenix.
Story.
But today, the cycle seems to be repeating. The engineer self-satisfaction of the 90s might be gone, but it seems like it's been replaced by a volume-chasing bureaucracy. The end result is depressingly similar, a disconnect from what makes a car special.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Nissan's story teaches us a profound lesson about innovation. Innovation isn't just an R&D department you fund, it's a culture of risk. The kiretsu system in the 90s killed risk to preserve harmony. Carlos Ghosn injected existential risk to create profit, but once they became profitable again, they stopped taking risks on the product and started taking risks on the balance sheet with things like subprime loans and unrealistic volume targets.
They took the wrong kind of risks.
The wrong kind of risks. Now, Nissan must decide if it has the stomach to risk everything again, to redefine itself in the age of EVs and fierce Chinese competition. They need another revolution, but I'm not sure they have a revolutionary left to lead it.
Can a system disrupt itself twice? Or is the gravity of the safe choice just too strong? It's a story that is still being written, and the next chapter is going to be absolutely critical. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.